What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that is at the forefront of raising standards. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. That is, if they'll ever talk to the media again. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from how companies are guarding against the latest cyber attacks to how we should reform capital gains tax. And of course, the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Emma Clayton, Senior Executive Director of Grey Bear Consultancy, a specialist healthcare marketing and communications consultancy providing wide-ranging solutions to clients across the life science industry. Their aim is simple: to help people get better. Emma has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for over 22 years and has led high-performing marketing, market access and communications teams. An ambassador for the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Diabetes, a service reviewer for NHS England, and founder of the NHS Women Network, she's at the very least a busy woman, and we're grateful to have her with us today. Emma, welcome.
Hi, Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, Emma, for joining us today. I know it's a busy time of, can be a busy time of year, but I think to kick things off, it would be a lovely place to start. I know it's been a couple of months since, of course, Grey Bear has been in the review. I know the listeners would love to know not only how you and the team are, but how business is going.
Well, actually, you're right. It is probably the busiest time of year for us as we sort of close off the year. We have just finished our second year, supremely stronger than I ever envisaged it would be. We started this roller coaster ride 2 years ago. Last week, we celebrated our second birthday last week.
Congratulations.
And if somebody had said that we would be in the position we're in now at this point, I mean, I would have just said you're crazy. So, we're closing the year on a real high. We've undertaken some fabulous projects. We've worked with some really great, enthusiastic, really motivated clients. And we are about to start adding more headcount into the team as we approach and open the year. So, I'm blown away.
It's fantastic, and I know obviously that you've gone from strength to strength since foundation, and in a really exciting way. And I think, though, to put things in perspective, and let's do that, shall we? So everybody knows. You've had a career in pharmaceuticals for the last, well, I'm sure you won't mind me saying, for 2 decades or so. What inspired you in the first instance to establish the business now, as you said, 2 years ago?
I tell the story a lot. And I guess I was what is now our client. And I guess the way I do it, I draw things out. So if you imagine a square, and a perfect square has the equilaterals in each corner, they are driven, I think, successful businesses are driven by really understanding the client motivation. And having been a client, I saw that there were lots of partners we were working with that always sort of had 2, 3 of those sides of the square, and it was never fully closed off. And if I were to draw that for you, on each corner of the square would be policies, process, products and people. And there was always a really great understanding of the policies of the NHS and healthcare and pharmaceutical regulations There was a really great understanding of the process and the ways of working that the pharmaceutical industry operates and should operate, and best practice, the best products or service, and then the best people. But there was never all four together. And so I decided that looking at it, everything we do now is driven by outcomes, and rather than saying, well, let's just do what everybody else is doing, just a bit louder, we really sit back and say, well, what are the challenges? What is the value proposition? What are the pain points that are currently ongoing for the NHS and for our clients? And then let's work back. What are we trying to achieve? And actually, how do we get there? It's through quality, the highest deliverables, making sure that all of those four corners of the square are met. And I'll sort of detail how we do that in a second. But I think more than anything, it's efficiency, because you can get the best outcomes and you can get the highest quality. But actually, people think that costs a lot of money. But actually, if you have the best people that have been doing this for a very long period of time and can attract that talent, you can work really efficiently so that actually you can deliver great results, really high quality, really efficiently. And I think that's our USP, really. That is what makes us stand out from all of the other companies in this space.
And can I just say, Emma, that's a really an awful lot of people, and obviously no fault of their own, they didn't work in the sector. They may be aware a gap does exist between, let's say, for example, between the day-to-day running of the NHS and so many other industries, especially pharmaceuticals. But you've explained, I think, very succinctly and very well about that policy, process, people, product gap. And it would be unfair to say there's a chasm that has existed in that before. So thank you for that. Very appreciated. And do explain, if you can, how you've gone about and how you've been able to build the bridges between those things.
Well, I guess the first was about everything we do is about people. So it's those relationships that we have with clients and understanding what drives them and their motivations, and then being able to build a team of people that are, really good talent. And so I started with an understanding of the NHS policy. I love politics. I studied politics. How I ended up in this space after doing history and politics for 4 years, I still scratch my head. So I've always really sat on the edges of politics and have got involved, up and down along the years. So having that real understanding of NHS policy and all the changes. I mean, we are in an era of NHS change like we've never seen before, but we're also in an era where never have a programme or an educational package or, the support of these private sector companies, whether it be the health tech or the pharmaceutical industry, being more relevant, because there's, as you say, this chasm of support around, and there's, workforce crisis looming. Well, it's there. It's not looming. It's there. And they more than ever, I think, need the skills of private sector. And that's not because I think that in any way private sector should start to own public sector. But, I was very fortunate that in my 20 years I was developed. I was put on sort of leadership training programs and skills and communication. And I see pharmaceuticals celebrating all of these, accolades that they have, and taking women leaders up to the top. And I sort of sat back and looked, and having lots of friends in the NHS, thought, well, isn't it about time that we gave those skills, and it was an ethical thing to do, to be able to invest that back in? And are we really able to look at ourselves in the mirror and say that, we are giving all of these medicines and we're saving lives, and, there's no greater impact that you can have on the NHS and patient lives than that. But there's more to it. This isn't just about patients, because patients can be treated brilliantly if they have a really good workforce that have got the skills around. And as we enter integrated care systems and STPs and PCNs and all of these acronyms that are coming, the fundamental red thread between all of this is communication and conversations. and collaboration and sharing best practice and knowledge and working together. And I think there's a big gap there, and there's a huge opportunity for the private sector to go in and support those conversations between NHS colleagues, and ultimately that's going to have an impact. And I feel so passionately about that everything we do to support pharmaceuticals is driven by that.
Absolutely. And before we touch on that in a bit more detail, because not least just after this general election that we've all just witnessed, it was very much a hot topic. But you mentioned, as you have done, people. And before we talk about the NHS more broadly, I know that half the reason that, maybe less or more, but certainly a major reason, Emma, why Grey Bear has been so successful is that you've been able to bring together experts in their field to work for you, and you've been able to do that because in a wholly positive way, you've made sure that they have flexibility of work in an increasingly demanding age, especially for, and let's be honest, women with children. And I think the listeners would love to know more about that, Emma.
Yeah, I mean, everybody says, well, how do you deliver the highest standards efficiently? And it's the people, it's everybody that works with me in Grey Bear. Now people say, oh gosh, you're such a girl power sort of consultancy. Well, we don't try to be that. We just happen to be that because of the flexibility that we can, afford people. And I'm a single mother. I've raised my daughter single-handedly, and I wanted to watch her grow up, but I also love what I do and feel very passionately. And I thought, well, actually, I can have both. And I think that women can also have both. I think men can have both as well. And I don't think that, in the days of technology that we need to sort of say, well, you have to travel to this office every day and you have to work these core hours, because the way that the world is working, we're becoming an always-on 24/7 society. And what I think I have done is provided a home for really talented people that just didn't fit in that 9-to-5 corporate world any longer, and have priorities away from work that are equally as important. And I think, we all operate around the fact that we have other commitments, but actually what that then brings is a real passion and enjoyment that, they get to be there for the family, whether it's children or caring for, older family members, or, I have one person that just, runs a yoga studio because that's where they get their peace of mind. So it's about tapping into the opportunity that, if you are flexible with people, they bring much more to the table and bring a real hunger and passion and expertise that, if you demand that they come and do a daily commute into an office in London or wherever you might be, you're really, cutting off the supply of some really talented people. And so I just opened the door and they've come sort of knocking, and it's really, really special. And
I have to say, Emma, you're very much a torchbearer in that direction, because without a doubt, especially over the coming decades, it will certainly be, I think, the generation below us will be people that will consider this a normal way to probably work. And the companies like yourselves, like Grey Bear, they're getting there first, are the ones leading the way and become the efficient ones, becomes the successful ones. So there's certainly a strong correlation there. And no doubt we could talk about that style in terms of just how companies should work in the future for half an hour on that topic alone. But we don't.
Of course, I could work clinical for hours.
Right, but unfortunately, we can't today. No. Let us, and you have already, you very much touched on this already, actually, Emma. And so let's dive right into it. The result of this election has produced a quite surprisingly high, perhaps majority for the Conservative Party, and part of that was certainly because, unlike election campaigns from the Tories before them, they gave higher spending commitments to the National Health Service than they usually perhaps have done in the past. Now, the opposition Labour Party ran a campaign mostly on decrying what they said was privatisation of the National Health Service. Now, we know the difference between something being privatised and private provision existing within the state sector. Now, with those, I know that there are two quite big points there, but with both those things in mind, Emma, how did you feel about the campaign? And secondly, what are your hopes now, given the Queen's speech, about the sector going forward?
I am absolutely thrilled that there is now a real focus on the health service, because for all of the 20 years that I've been working alongside with innovation and leading treatments, we've always had these huge challenges of how do we get some of this more innovative medicine and treatments to patients quicker. And we've seen, the cancer fund set up with David Cameron, and we've seen progression, but it's always just been a little bit tinkered with, because when the Conservatives obviously took government 9-10 years ago, they had to go into a period of austerity and public spending had to be cut. And I don't feel that was taken, with any joy. And, as with anything, we have to always watch our spending when we rack up the debts. There's always been this sort of highs and lows of public spending, and what I am so chuffed about, and it really doesn't matter who is in government for me on a sort of business level, I can separate the two, is that having worked so closely with the NHS, and you see your friends working all hours, burned out, leaving the profession, just thoroughly disillusioned. There's toxicity in the bureaucracy, the management, the leadership.
It breaks your heart.
It is absolutely heartbreaking. And I've seen friends, even leave the country and go and work in different health services. And it's when, as a business, a small business, you are attracting the best talent, and you see other people losing the best talent, you just think something has to give. And to have such a commitment, not just a commitment that is this is running a campaign, they're now putting it in law, and within a week of being in government, in the Queen's speech, we are funding, we are putting nurse bursaries back in, we are going to fast track all the mental health reforms, we are really going to invest in building a workforce and building access to R&D and technology. I mean, I really do have the highest hopes that I've had in my whole career that finally, patients are going to get the treatments and the access to care that they deserve. The workforce hopefully will become much more positive and motivated, and we'll start to attract more. And I just think what a really great ballsy commitment to make and enshrine it in law. So I feel elated that this is happening.
And I think you speak on behalf of not just your sector there, Emma, but a great deal of workers in the National Health Service as well. And obviously, we can't predict the future. If we could, we'd both be very rich people. But we will. We will. I think there is a reason to look forward with confidence here.
And I think that there was a huge campaign around let's get the B word. I'm going to try and
almost got there without
conversation without not saying it. But let's move the B out of out of the way that we've been talking about, and analysis paralysis, and let's concentrate on the things that really matter to all of us.
The great point there, Emma, is that no matter whether you voted Remain 3.5 years ago or Leave 3.5 years ago, for goodness sake, for 3.5 years we've only been able to talk about it, and clearly the election result, I think, was a result of, no matter where you lived in the country, enough is enough. We must talk about healthcare. We must talk about education. We must talk about defence like we used to, like a normal country, because we haven't been able to.
Absolutely. And I think, there's been a lot of anxiety and fear that Brexit would mean that we would lose the workforce in the NHS. So I'm glad that, this point system is going to be hugely focused on retaining those talents.
Yes.
And it's not going to be, you don't, come from this country, you can't enter. It's just basically we will, grow our workforce with the talents we need for the holes and the gaps that we've got. So that's also, great to hear that those great international people with, in the NHS workforce get to still stay and contribute to, what is ultimately the best health service that we have in the world, but just needs a bit more love and attention.
Absolutely. And I think when the immigration bill comes forward in this Parliament, it'd be sensible to put money on that. The priority in it will be exceptionally fast-tracked visas for doctors and nurses from all over the world, no matter where you're from, and that will be so important.
Yeah, agree.
Now,
I think the future is very bright.
It is, and I think a lot of people feel like that as things stand. Emma, I'm very conscious of the time, and I know we could keep talking, but let me just, if you don't mind me, bring it back down to Grey Bear again, and finishing by perhaps asking Emma, given a certain degree perhaps of uncertainty, but perhaps more certainty than we had a year ago, what are the plans of the business for its third year?
Well, we open our first day of business with interviews for 3 people that will be coming on. We are growing into now fintech. So we have got some clients that are recognising the creativity that we're able to give in highly regulated industries. So where we've been able to bring creativity, and when we say creativity, it's not just sort of, pretty pictures and designs and advertising campaigns. It's real creative thought about how you can deliver outcomes and campaigns that suit the needs and deliver these sort of outcomes with strategic thinking. But in a highly regulated industry where sometimes people feel creativity is stifled as a result of those rules and regulations. So now fintech, another highly regulated industry, are starting to want to work with us and grow, their propositions and their storytelling to be able to engage with new audiences. So that's really very exciting. So we're building a team there, and I think that it would be remiss of us when we are, our DNA is all about healthcare, is to really stay on top of all of these changes that have been announced in the Queen's speech yesterday, and to really see if we can support, those challenges and work with leaders in the NHS to see, and pharmaceutical companies to see how we can best fit programs around there. And one of the things I'm the most excited about is I do quite a lot of pro bono work with a group of women leaders, but also with some primary care network clinical directors. And I'm also licensed and accredited in behavioural insights, and so I'm going in to run some pro bono communication skills workshops to be able to help them to fast track their collaboration and understand the strengths and skills and challenges that they might operate within, so that they can work on them much quicker and have those difficult conversations and negotiations much easier, and depersonalise some of the sort of anxieties that they might have around each other. So I'm very excited about that piece of work that we'll be delivering next year to really try and help those integrated care systems come together much quicker and effectively.
Well, Emma, it's exceptionally exciting 12 months ahead. I hope you'll have the time to come back and talk about it with us again soon.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Emma, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Grey Bear Consultancy are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. But of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you president there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because, you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want. And I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I always used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians aren't interested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, some might not know, is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxist to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I will join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to us. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dialogue conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I had Che Guevara. I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to kind of, you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunt was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment you think in serving as Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, because you're the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like they got in the States to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all passed up. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
That's very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. and within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it's like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive... It's a massive event, so I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps, and we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. And the hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are. And
I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to.
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it will be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it will be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle, those that have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Because thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Westminster Arms to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.